Hello, my friends. Welcome to the Life Shift podcast. I am here with Grant Baldwin, who is a founder and CEO of the Speaker Lab, and I'm super intimidated, but thank you for being here.
Nothing to be worried about, my friend. I appreciate you letting me hang out with you. This is gonna be fun.
And add to that intimidation factor, Grant is also a podcaster. So he's been podcasting since I think I saw January 2016. Is that true?
Yeah. So the Speaker Lab podcast we started in January 2016. Prior to that, I did another podcast for about 2 years. So yeah, I've been podcasting for
Since before it was
since
podcasting.
yeah, I mean back 2004, 2014 or so. So been doing it for a minute, but it's a great medium. I listen to a ton of podcasts, host of podcasts, been on a bunch of interviews. I'm all about podcasting.
Same. As I was telling you before we started recording, I'm pretty new in this space. I've been releasing weekly since March, but when I was listening to your 422nd episode, I was like, wow, I can't wait to get there and hear all the stories that people come on the show and share, whether they're the external life shifts that happen to them, or in your case, which seems to be more of an internal shift. I
Mm-hmm.
think my listeners are reaching out to me in the DM form or in the review form of saying, I really need to hear that story today. And
Yeah.
that's kind of my goal. And I think what you're going to share will inspire people that are kind of like on this brink of something.
Yeah.
But before we give away kind of what your life shift is, maybe you could paint a picture of what Grant's life was leading up to kind of this more pivotal moment in your life.
Yeah. So if we go, there's one initial shift that I had even as a teenager,
Yeah.
and that was that my parents got a divorce when I was, I think, 13, 14, something like that. And at the time, I remember just feeling like I just didn't know anybody whose parents were divorced, and
Right.
I thought I was the only one, and it was like a source of shame and embarrassment, um, uh, and I remember thinking, I mean, even fast forward and like to today, and I look at like some of my friends back then and friends I knew at the time whose parents are still together. I was like, man, I was at your house. Like, your parents are super dysfunctional. Like, how are they still together? My parents didn't make it. So that was definitely a big shift. But the one year I think you're kind of alluding to was,
But before we
um,
go there,
yeah,
actually, why do you think you felt shame in that? Just because you felt like you were the only one that had
yeah, I
divorced
just didn't
parents?
really know anybody else whose parents, and I'm sure, like I went to a bigger school and knew a ton of other kids. But I just didn't know anybody else whose parents were divorced.
Yeah.
And I knew, like, you're over at some of their houses from time to time or sleepovers or whatever, and like, yeah, there's some dysfunction there. And I felt like with my own parents, it's kind of like, yeah, your parents fight because that's what parents do. But I remember just thinking like, oh dang, I never really realized it was that bad. So yeah, it was definitely it was just a rough stretch. It was a rough season. I do think though that has impacted um, life today, my marriage today. My
Mm,
wife and I, we were high school sweethearts. We started dating when I was 15. So we've been together for almost 26 years.
wow.
And have three beautiful daughters. It's me and a house full of women. It's the absolute best. I absolutely love it. But I would say, like, and my wife's parents split up as well, and so we both come from divorced families, and like that certainly sucks, and wouldn't wish that on anybody. But
Hmm.
it definitely has, I think, helped and impacted our marriage of going like, okay, we know what
Right.
it's like to be on the receiving end of that as children, and so we don't not only don't want to put our kids through that, but we don't want to go through that.
Right.
And so, like, our marriage is a huge priority. Having a good, healthy marriage,
Yeah.
being good parents for our girls, like, is a really big deal, really
I
big deal.
I
And
think
so
that makes sense. I mean, it makes sense that sometimes you have to experience these things to know what you don't want. For
sure.
me, my parents split up. I want to say maybe I was 5 or 6. So my whole
Mhm.
life, I just didn't understand what it was like to have parents together because
Yeah,
you
yeah,
don't really form too many memories before that.
yep,
So it's interesting to hear how you were in your teenage years, right? So
yep,
it's
yep.
completely different experience because you know the before and you know the after. Whereas my life was always just that after, and then my mom died, so then everything else changed. But
Yeah,
yeah, it's interesting to see how it forms your current life. But anyway, we digress.
yeah. No, I mean, it definitely, yeah. So I think that it definitely had a big impact, but has
Yeah.
also, again, had a big, really, like, shaped what my own marriage looks like
Hmm.
today.
Yeah. Do you think that it also like kind of that feeling or that shame feeling or kind of just how you felt that you might be the only one going through it, does that shape how you operate in business and in your speaking? Does it give you other layers?
Good question. I don't know that I've ever really thought about it in
Yeah.
that way. Uh, so I don't, man, I don't know. I don't. It's maybe one of those things like, if I spend
Yeah.
a couple hours with a therapist or something, I'd be like, oh wow, actually, I have all this bitterness and regret and whatever toward my parents. Like I have a good relationship with both my parents
Right.
today.
Yeah.
They've been apart longer than they were together, and so yeah, kind of to your point, like the idea of them even together, like, oh, that's weird, like I can't even picture it. What is that like with your parents together?
Yeah.
As you kind of a big part of my teen years was them apart, and you just
Yeah.
you don't know much different.
Yeah. It's navigating new waters. But you said that you met your current, I mean, your wife, I shouldn't say current wife, you met your wife in high school, which is a
Yeah.
whole other, like that's, and you're still with her, which
Yep.
is amazing. And I believe that's part of kind of your getting closer to your life shift and what you've done for yourself.
Yeah, and I think that even uh like we had been together for maybe a year or so when her parents split up. And again, we were just, teenagers, but
Right.
when her parents split up, it was kind of a weird deal. It was also kind of a bit of a public thing. But uh I think having like I think a big thing that's helped our marriage and our relationship is in a lot of ways like we've grown up together. So
Mm,
like we've experienced some crazy stuff together, and so we started dating like shortly after my parents split up, and then um, my mom actually got remarried, and then they split up after I think 7-8 years, something like that. And so it was kind of rocky, and so like we've lived a lot of our family experiences together. And so I'm the oldest of three. I have a younger brother, younger sister. So my sister was, I think, 9 when my wife and I started dating. And so
mm,
she's like, I don't remember life without her in it,
right.
and so it's just kind
Yeah.
of been this older sister. They've kind of grown up together. So it's which is not great dating advice. Like start dating someone when you're 15 and it just works out, forever. But I do think that it's just an advantage that we've had, that it has helped, of just like a lot of good, bad, ugly of life that has
Right.
shaped who we are today. We've experienced together.
Right. And I think a lot of those moments can either will test you, right? They'll test
Totally.
your relationship. And so by surviving those moments together, I think you create a stronger bond, or I would imagine that you create a stronger bond
Yeah.
because it's a shared experience. So you can kind of rely on each other.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
I mean, one, that's amazing that you're still with the same person from high school. I don't think there's a ton of people that can say that, but it also makes sense having gone through all those moments that you would be, right?
Yeah.
And to know that both sets of your parents split up, you kind of also have that, like, we don't want to do that, and
We
we've
had
been through it.
earlier this year is when we celebrated our 20th wedding anniversary, and so I was telling our oldest daughter is 16, and so I was telling her, I was like, hey, actually, like mom and I, we've been married longer than either of our parents. You're her grandparents. And she thought about it for a second. She's like, well, congratulations, you set the high score. I was like, yeah, we did. So but at the same time, like my mom's parents both passed away in the past couple of years, but they were married, I think it was 68, 69
Wow.
years. Met on a blind date, so you looking at them and like just a awesome couple, so yeah, even though like for us, we both came from divorced families. It's like it doesn't mean that that has to happen to us. Like there's you get to ultimately decide what life looks like for you, and determining whether or not whatever happens historically or in the past, whether it was your fault or someone else's, it was you're a product of someone else's decisions, positive or negative. Like you still get to decide for you what life looks like going forward.
Yeah, and I mean, just that note of you get to decide for you. So many people are stuck on, maybe not as much nowadays, but very much that society tells us like the next step or what you should do or the order in which you should do things.
Sure.
And I think it's good to say, like you don't have to repeat the past, whether that's
Yeah.
staying married or getting divorced, right? Like you can make your own decisions. And so it sounds like you're setting a good example for your kids, but also just the fact that you say you get to make your own choices. I imagine that you're probably putting that on them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think that my wife and I, like, especially as our girls have grown up, our girls are 16, 14, and 11. And so, like our oldest, as she gets closer to college and kind of thinking through next steps, it's constantly reminding her of, you can do whatever you want in terms of a career. And there's a lot of different options. And here's kind of some pros and cons of all these different options. You don't need to do what I've done or what mom has done, but ultimately, like, you're in control. So like good, bad, ugly, and different, like you get to decide. And so like I look at my own life today and I feel like I have a really great life, and I wouldn't trade lives with anyone. But it's not because like I didn't win the lottery, we didn't get
Mm-hmm.
some inheritance, we didn't just get lucky. Like there's a lot of like intentional decisions that we've made that has created the kind of life that we've had, of kind of like reverse engineering and figuring out like what kind of life do we want to have, what are the things that we value, what do we want to do, and like how do we work towards that. And it's not, again, it's not an overnight process, but being intentional about building your life in such a way that you're just like, dang, I wouldn't, this is awesome, I wouldn't trade this with anybody. And so telling my girls that and reminding them like, hey, mom and dad have a great life as a family, we have a great life, but it's not an accident. Like mom and dad, we've worked on
Mm,
this, and we're intentional in our marriage, we're intentional in our relationships with you, we're intentional as a family, we're intentional in our own individual lives. And so we have a great life because we've made decisions and work towards that.
yeah. Were you always, I mean, I love the word intention. I love leaning into that. Were you always that way growing up, like in what you wanted to do, like say starting in high school?
I think to some degree, yes. I think I've always been pretty motivated, driven. I think that um, yeah, I mean, despite parents splitting up, I think overall, like I've had a pretty normal,
Mm-hmm.
average life. So there wasn't some massive, trauma or anything that has happened to me. At least I don't feel like. But I feel like um, I've always felt like I'm very like just mentally and emotionally healthy. Like I'm a pretty stable guy. Like the highs aren't too high, the lows aren't too low. Life is really good. I'm very optimistic, positive person, not naive. That can still rain today, and there can be a damper on things, but so you're not guaranteed squat. But I think just overall, like, man, I really enjoy my life. I
Yeah.
really, really enjoy the kind of life that I have. And I think that the good, bad, ugly, I'll give you an example. Like sometimes in people will ask like, okay, if you go, what's your biggest regret? Or if you can go back and change one
Yeah.
thing, what would you change? And I was like, I wouldn't change anything. And sometimes I even have a hard time coming up with like, oh, here's my biggest regret, because not that I haven't had them, but it's just like everything that has happened up until this point has led to this moment. And I
Exactly.
really enjoy this moment. I like where my life is at today. And so if my parents had stayed together, but maybe they had been miserable, like how would that have changed my own marriage today, and how would that change the dynamic of the relationship that I have with each of them? And so like everything that's happened, again, all of it has led to this point. And so um yeah, I always remind my girls, like, if you don't like your life, like, fix it, do
Mm-hmm.
something. Like, don't wait for um yeah, and they're younger, but just in general, like, don't wait for whatever political party's in power, and whoever you vote for isn't going to change your life. And um you get to decide where you live and what kind of work you do and what you do with your money and who you spend your time with and what you think about and where you spend your energy and effort and resources. Like, that's on you. Like, you get
Yeah.
to choose that and decide that. So yeah, if you don't like your life, like, you're the problem and the solution.
It's interesting too, because I talk to a lot of people. I mean, I mentioned this a little bit ago of how I felt like growing up at 18, there was an invisible checklist that I had to accomplish. Like I
Hmm.
had to graduate high school and then I had to go to college. It didn't matter what I chose in college, I just had to go.
Yeah.
Right. And then I had to graduate and then I had to get a good job. And I felt like there was this invisible checklist, because I can't find the checklist. I don't think there really was one. I love that you are instilling that in your kids, that there isn't really a checklist. Like,
Yeah.
change your life to the way that you want it. So what did you like, how did you get to that in high school? You graduated high school. Like, what happened? How'd you get to where you are now?
Yeah, so I think and this was kind of the big shift that I think for me was in high school. I was really involved in my local church, and my youth pastor had a really big impact in my life. And I was like, I want to do that. Like that seems like a cool
Mm,
career path. And I just kind of felt like if I could make the kind of impact and difference in others' lives that he had made in my own life, that just seemed super fulfilling and rewarding. And so after high school, I went to Bible college. And I was like, I want to follow in his footsteps. I want to be a youth pastor. And so then my first kind of career role was at a different church as a youth pastor. I did that for about a year and a half or so. And parts of it I liked, parts of it I didn't like. But one of the things I really enjoyed was speaking, and speaking was one of those things that I felt like I was decent at, and I wanted to do more of. And so, I think I quickly was starting to feel like, maybe this role as youth pastor isn't for me. But I was also kind of going like, well, crap, like I went to college for this, and what would there's not like something, oh, I'd much rather be doing this, or I should be doing something
mm,
differently. And so was kind of like having this, felt like this quarter life crisis of going like, what do I want to be when I grow up? And I feel like I'm kind of, I've taken some steps where I'm at least somewhat deep in, and feeling like I can't
right.
change, can
Am I
I? Or how does
stuck?
this work? And so, uh, I remember having a conversation with my wife and feeling like I think I want to, leave this job. I don't know what I'd rather be doing, but I feel confident like this isn't it. And to further complicate things is that she was, I think, 4 or 5 months pregnant with
Mm,
our first child. And so, and I think that was definitely like a factor that kind of pushed me. There's nothing like bringing a kid into the world that just causes you to question everything and like, what am I doing with my life? And so, so that season where, I think for like I left that role a couple months later, she had our oldest child, who's now 16, and then that stretch of about a year or so of just kind of like going, well, crap, what do I want to do now? Like I thought this is what I want to do. I spent several years going to college for this thing, and
right.
time, energy, effort, resources, money invested to do this thing. It's not what I want. I don't know what I'd rather be doing. And a lot of like well-meaning, well-intentioned friends and family members around me going like, hey, you quit your job and wife's pregnant. Did you think about this? And you're
Yeah.
like, I thought I did, but maybe not. So that stretch was, like in my mid 20s, was like a big, big life shift of really thinking through like, okay, what do I really want to do? What would that look like? And again, that's not an overnight thing, but like really taking the time to do some of that digging and soul searching, and then figuring out, if it is speaking or for me or whatever it could be,
Right.
I'm going like, okay, now again, let's start taking some intentional steps that direction, knowing it's not going to just magically happen. But start moving that direction. And so, yeah, I still look back on that period of life as just a massive, massive life shift that led to where I'm at today.
When in that process did you decide to quit what you were doing?
So I vividly remember the point where I was at. I was kind of like him hawing on it, like, do I want to do this? I don't want to do this. I had a conversation with my boss at the church, who admittedly like wasn't the best guy to work for at all, and he was definitely it was definitely a factor of just like, hey, I don't know that I want
Mm,
to work in this type of environment. Um, but I remember I was at a conference. At the time, I was at this church I was on staff at was in Missouri, as where we live, where we grew up, and happened to be we live today in Nashville. And so while I was on staff at this church, I was happened to attend a conference in Nashville several years before moving here. But I was at this conference for youth pastors, and I remember sitting in a session, and I vividly remember the speaker saying something to the effect of, if you don't enjoy at least 80% of what you're doing, you should find something else. And I remember just thinking like, really? We can do that? And I remember leaving that session and calling my wife, and we'd been having some of these conversations, but I remember
right.
leaving that session, calling her and saying like, I think we're done. And again, I
Yeah.
don't know what's next, but I remember leaving that session and calling her thinking like, okay, we're going to rip the Band-Aid and figure it out from there.
Have you ever called that person?
That
Reached out to
speaker?
them? Yeah.
No, I couldn't even tell you their name.
Uh, could you imagine
Yeah,
reaching
I
out and be
don't.
like, "You changed my life by saying
Yeah,
that
yeah.
one sentence of
But
thing."
I mean, I think it's also interesting, like, kind of fast forward. So, to today, where I was a full-time speaker for about 8, 9 years or so, and now run a training company called the Speaker Lab, where we teach people the business of speaking. How do you
Right.
basically, like, where I was of going like, I want to be a speaker, but I don't know, like, how do you find gigs and how much you charge and what do you speak about? And like, how does this world work? And so that's who we work with today, is speakers who are going like, I want to do this, but I don't know how. And so we've worked with thousands of speakers all over the world, all different topics, industries, ages, stages of life. And so one of the things that I find really rewarding about that is, one, that helping people who were where I was going like,
Right.
I think I can do this. I just need someone to tell me, but also the ripple effect of the work that we're doing with speakers, knowing like, we could probably, everybody watching, listening, we could probably all come up with speakers who have impacted our
Mm-hmm.
life in some way, and going like, I can't even remember this guy's name, but something he said, a one line thing that
Yep.
he probably wouldn't even remember, like dramatically impacted the
Right.
trajectory of my life. And so now, as a part of the Speaker Lab, if we're able to work with and coach and train other speakers who are then able to have those impacts on audiences that they speak to that we will never know about,
Right.
but to feel like for a fraction of a percent, we were able to be a part of
Yeah.
that and be able to help facilitate that, like, that's incredibly, incredibly rewarding.
Yeah. That butterfly effect. It's just
Very much so.
interesting. I always think of, I talked to someone the other day where a phone call that he answered, and he never usually answered a phone call, and he got that phone call and someone said something that really just stuck with him, and that changed his life. It's like,
Yeah.
had you had to go to the bathroom during that
Yep.
segment of maybe you would have stuck around in your position for a little bit longer until it was, until you found your next trigger. Or even had you listened to all the naysayers in your life that were like, are you sure you want, like,
Yeah.
was this the smartest move with a kid at home and,
Yep.
and a family that you're about to raise? Is this the smartest thing? Because I think, again, me stuck in my society head, I feel like that's just expected of us. Like, we have to have a plan. We have to know what's going on. And it's nice to see that you were able to like have enough confidence in yourself, to be able to move forward. So once you called your wife and was like, done, what steps did you take to kind of create the life that you have now? Because I'm imagining, how long ago was this? Like 15,
Yeah, this would have been
16.
17 years ago or so at this point.
Yeah. So I'm imagining that what you have now with the Speaker Lab did not exist in a format that would be helpful to you.
Oh, not at all. Yeah, yeah. And so, at the time, like, after kind of doing that soul searching for a little while of going like, okay, I want to be a speaker, and
Yeah.
like, what does that mean though? And at the time, again, this was 17 years ago, there weren't any books or podcasts or resources or training or coaching or anything that I really knew about how do you actually do that. And so, part of like whenever we started the Speaker Lab about 7 years ago or so, was to create resources that I wish I had
Mm-hmm.
when I got started. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, it was, when, as a youth pastor, speaking was one of those things I felt like I was decent at. I was speaking on a weekly basis to students. I would speak every so often on the weekend in big church, and I got good feedback from that. And it's just kind of a mix of like, I felt like there was something there, some type of like raw talent. I also really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the process of it. I enjoyed, the art and science of communicating an idea and a thought, storytelling. And so it was kind of, just thinking through like, what do I want to do? What could that look like? And speaking was the thing I kept coming back to. Another thing that was really helpful for me early, and still to this day, is looking for people who are a step or two ahead of you, who are doing what you want to do and doing it in a way that you want to do it.
Mm.
And so for me, is going like, okay, I enjoy working with students, I enjoy speaking. And so, browsed around and finding, did a bunch of searching just on Google for youth speakers, high school speakers, college speakers, and found like there's a bunch of them out there. And just kind of like trying to peek behind the curtain and see what they're up to, and finding anything I could on anything that they've been up to, reaching out to some of them. And it was just kind of like, it helped me to see someone who was, oh, like, that's it. I see it now.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it kind of clicks for me,
Right.
of that's the thing that I want to do. And there's someone who's doing it, and not like oh, there's Tony Robbins, he's a speaker, I can do that. No, but like someone who's like a step or two ahead, not light years ahead, but doing what you want to do and doing it in a way that you want to do it. Oh, they're speaking to schools, or they're speaking to whatever, and that resonates with what I want to do. And it just kind of like helped in my mind, like I could see myself doing that,
Right.
and it became more real and tangible, And so that was incredibly helpful again then, and even still today, of finding people who are doing something that you want to do and doing it in a way that you want to do it. And again, a step or two ahead, that builds some confidence, but also there's probably some breadcrumbs there that you can follow and learn from.
Yeah, and I think it helps to envision that you in that spot, like I can actually make a career out of this speaking thing. Because I think a
Yep.
lot of people, well, a lot of people don't like speaking, right? Because they're probably the number one fear is public speaking.
Yep.
But I think there's a lot of people that enjoy speaking but don't consider it to be a viable option for them. Was the experience of speaking, like just the act of speaking, kind of what drew you, or was it a specific topic, or like what part of that was like, oh, I
um
can make this a forever career?
Yeah, I mean, I think just speaking in general,
Mm-hmm.
like I knew I wanted to keep speaking to students. So this is a big mistake that a lot of new speakers make is we say, oh, I just enjoy speaking. Speaking's fun. So who do I speak to? I don't know. I speak to people. I speak to humans. My message is for everybody. And what do I speak about? I don't know. What do you want me to speak about? I can speak
Right.
about anything, you know? Well, if you're trying to speak about anybody and everybody about anything and everything, like that just doesn't work.
Right.
And so I knew real quick, like I like speaking and I like speaking to students. And there are other audiences that I could speak to, but like at least to get started, like that just felt like low hanging fruit. It's a world that
Right.
I understood. And so, yeah, I really enjoyed you're kind of like walking on a tightrope with no net, and you're giving a live speech and a live presentation. I like the fun of that. I like seeing the real time reaction and feedback to that, because you and I are recording a podcast right now, and there may be millions of people that listen to this, and but like you and I will never sit and watch someone listen to us talk,
Mm-hmm. Right.
and so people are going to listen to this in their car, or they're going to listen to it, while they're working out or
Right.
making dinner or whatever, and we will never watch that. But whenever you're giving a speech in front of, or a presentation in front of 50 or 500 or 5,000 people, you immediately find out, like,
Yeah.
I delivered that line or told that story and that worked, or it didn't work, or people laughed, or people looked confused or lost. And so you get that real time feedback, and there's something really rewarding and fun about that, of providing that experience where you learn something that you can improve each time you give that talk and that presentation, and just kind of that rush of that experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people can relate to that, in the sense of any kind of live performance, right? You
Yeah.
can it gives you it feeds you in a different way than say a recorded presentation that you might give, for a school project or for a
Yep.
work project, or even just a Zoom kind of conversation. Uh, that is a little different as well, because people are maybe paying attention. They're not paying to come see you, or as students, that place is paying them to come see you. Did you find students to be your area because they might be more challenging to engage? Or did you find them challenging to engage just in general as a student population?
I mean, they're challenging to engage for sure, regardless.
Is
And
that
I don't
what
know that that was necessarily like a factor or variable in me saying, "Hey, I want to speak to them." I think it was just kind of, I had a lot of experience speaking to students as a youth pastor. I enjoyed it, and so when I was going, I want to be a speaker. What are the opportunities that exist? It was kind of a natural next step. I was also, I was pretty young. I was in my early mid 20s, and so it wasn't like, I'm a veteran career executive, and so
right?
it makes sense for me to talk, in the oil and gas industry where I have a ton of experience. Like I didn't know any of that squat, and so I think it's just kind of like a natural, logical next step for me. But yeah, like speaking to students is it's fun, but it's also very challenging.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if I was going to speak to a high school, like they were glad I got them out of class for a little while, but like they didn't care what I had to say. And so you really, whereas like if you're speaking to typically like an adult audience, are probably going to be a bit more respectful and probably going to be paying attention, even if they're like not totally
Right.
clued in with you or zoned in with you, like they're at least going to be trying to pretend like they're paying attention. Student, if they're not interested, if they're not engaged, like they don't care. And so there is like that was part of the fun of the challenge of going like,
Mm-hmm.
all right, I got 1,000 teenagers in this auditorium who have no idea who I am and don't really care what I have to say. what do I need to do to get them on my side in a very short window of time?
Right.
And so for me, like one of the things that worked really well was humor. I used a
Hmm.
lot of humor, a lot of comedy, a lot of storytelling, and just tried to like build trust and build rapport, build connection with an audience that just didn't know who I was and didn't care who I was. And so, if I was giving a talk, like a high percentage of it was a lot of humor, a lot of jokes, a lot of comedy, a lot of storytelling, so that then when you're making a point, you've got them on your side,
Right.
and it's the sugar to make the medicine go down type thing.
Yeah.
And so you're building that rapport and that connection, so that when you do bring some type of truth to the table, you've earned the right to share that and to be heard.
Yeah, I mean, and I think to your point, knowing your target audience, right, as what you alluded to, you're not, a speaker for everyone. If you have that, you have in mind what their needs and wants are. In a lot of cases, self-deprecating humor probably
Yep.
brings a lot of those students in. I think another piece that was probably a smart decision, I don't know if it was intentional or not, is the fact that you were in your mid 20s, so you were closer in age to them,
Sure.
which then creates more of a relatability. You weren't, a 70-year-old person that they didn't know. You
Yep.
instead you were someone that was only a couple years older than them,
Yeah, it's kind of
naturally
like
kind of
an
connection.
and a lot of times, like if I was speaking to a school audience or a youth audience, it wasn't like I was saying something that they had never heard. They'd
Right.
heard about stuff from their parents and teachers and that sort of thing, but it's just a different voice, and it's kind of a like a big brother type
Right.
feel, but wrapped with a lot of like an entertaining way, that again kind of builds that rapport and that trust with them.
Yeah, it almost feels like what you mentioned before is kind of your recommendation of someone leaning into a new field is to find someone a
Sure.
couple steps ahead in life, right? And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
you're able to kind of not tell them what to do, but kind of share your experiences in a way that might be relatable to them.
Yep.
So speaking of that, what was what was that first paid speaking gig that you got in your journey? Like what was that like for you?
It was amazing. I vividly remember that. The first like true paid gig that I did, I had, like I mentioned, we were living in Missouri, and I'd reached out to a couple different events. I heard back from one of them. They hired me to speak, um, in February 2006, and it was at this Missouri 4-H conference. And if you're not familiar with 4-H, it's kind of like a leadership group for students, especially like in agricultural places and in rural communities. And I came from the suburbs. I didn't know anything about,
Mm,
farming or cows or any of that stuff. But, so I went and I spoke for 30, 45 minutes or so to about 300 students, got a standing ovation, and had a bunch of students who were like, "Oh, that was awesome. That was really cool. Can you come to my school?" Or that was really whatever. And, I remember afterwards talking with the event planner, the decision maker. They were super kind, very complimentary, gave me a check. I remember getting to my car and opening the envelope, and it was for $1,000, which I knew like we'd contracted that. I knew that's what it was. It wasn't like a surprise or something. But, I just remember holding that, just thinking like, "Holy crap! I mean, it was like felt like $1 billion at the
right.
time. $1,000 to stand up there and talk for a while and have people tell me how great that was. Like that was amazing." And so it was just, I remember like breaking down in tears and just feeling like, man, that was just so rewarding and so much fun, and it was just like a boost of confidence of
Yeah.
like this, that's what I want to do. I want to keep, how do I keep doing things like this, and if I can get paid for it too, like that's amazing. And so I think that was also like when we talk about like that life shift of going from, okay, I went to college for this one thing, I did that
Hmm.
one thing, and then tried to figure it out, maybe if I was going to do something different, and then do the speaking thing. That, yeah, I didn't have anybody who came up to me and was like, "This is a bad idea, you shouldn't be a speaker, let me rain on your
That's
parade." Like
good.
nobody did that, but I'm sure people were like, "Are you sure? Like, how are you going to make this?" Like, speaking once for $1,000 is great, but that's not going to, you can't live off $1,000 for a year. And so how do you do that consistently? How do you do
Right.
that ongoing? How do you turn this into a business? How do you turn this into a career? But it was just kind of, again, that first step of confidence of like, no, I can do this. Like it's going to require a lot of work and
Right.
effort. It's kind of like if you're trying to lose 50 pounds and it just felt like this insurmountable thing, but then you lose that first pound and you're like, okay, I got a long ways to go, but
Right.
we're headed in the right direction. And it just kind of gives you a bit more confidence to keep the momentum going.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense to me. Getting that check was not really about getting paid for that one moment, but it was getting paid for all that legwork that you were doing
Sure.
and building. Like, yeah, I'm on the right path. This is possible. So
Yeah.
I totally understand kind of breaking down in that moment for that
Yeah.
big old $1,000, right?
Yep. Yep.
But that amazing. I mean, how much of your time did something like that take to get that job? Like, was there a lot of legwork that to because like how do you get hired as your first speaking gig?
Yeah, yeah. I think it's important to remember like every speaker starts from zero.
Right.
Every speaker starts from scratch. Similar, like we were talking about, like with the podcast stuff. The and so yeah, it's a lot of like and again, this isn't exclusive to just speaking, but if you wanted to be a freelance graphic designer, if you wanted to do accounting or whatever, and you're trying to get that first client, like everybody starts at zero. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's, yeah, it's a lot of work to kind of get going
Yeah.
and to get someone to take you seriously or to pay you money or to trust you that the product or service or whatever that you're trying to provide is worth their money and their investment. And so yeah, it's a lot of work initially and then ongoing. But I remember I had a speaker friend tell me early on, he said, you have to fall in love with the process,
Mm.
meaning like, um, uh, I'll give you an example of like going to the gym. Like oftentimes people like, I want to be in shape. I want to, feel like I don't have some dad bod. I want to be able to stand in front of the mirror and not have a tear, fall out of my face. I just want to feel confident. And so like, we want this end result, but the point being like, you have to fall on, like nobody wants to get up early to go to
Mm-hmm.
the gym. Like that's not real thrilling for most people. And he said, you just have to fall in love with the process. And so the so for me, I almost enjoyed like booking the gig more than doing the gig,
Mm.
meaning like just falling in love with like going to
That's
the
great.
gym. The end result is standing on the stage and like, okay, I did a lot of work to book this gig, to follow up with them, to get to this point. But it's also like falling in love with the process of just showing up and doing the work,
The
whether you
hustle.
feel like it or not, and just being like treating it like a business. And
Mm-hmm.
that was something I did early on and still to this day, of just like being an entrepreneur, being um, a speaker, whatever you want to do. There are days where you may not feel like it, or you're tired, or you want to sleep in, or you want to take a day off or whatever. But like this is a business. And so I
Mm.
show up and I do the work, and I take days off and take time off, and I've got flexibility and freedom and autonomy. But at the same time, there are days where you're like, I don't want to do this. Like, no, like treat it like a professional and show up. And this is part of what you're supposed to do. And if you want those results,
Right.
you got to be willing to put in the work. So you can't, I think, especially with speakers, I remind speakers, like you can't expect professional pro results if you're putting in hobby effort. So if you want speaking or podcasting or whatever to be a hobby, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But you can't say, well, why am I not having, millions of downloads or booking a ton of gigs, and I'm just kind of putting in a few
Right.
like minimal effort. Like it doesn't work like that. So if you want professional results, you got to be willing to put in, professional effort.
At what point in your journey do you feel like you leveled up? Like at what was there a number that you wanted to hit? Was there a amount of bookings that you wanted to hit? Was there some place where you felt like this is it?
Um, I mean, I'll give you one thing that was really, really instrumental in kind of transitioning from, and like a big shift from going from just pure speaker to starting the speaker lab.
Yeah.
And it was this, like I was doing about 60, 70 speaking gigs a year, was traveling a lot, was gone 80, 90 nights a year, was doing like a lot of like big keynotes, thousands of people, big auditoriums, arenas. It was awesome. I loved it.
Yeah.
But it was also a reminder, like speaking is a high paying manual labor job,
Right.
in that I'd get paid really, really well to stand on stage and run my mouth for an hour. But the nature of it was I had to get on a plane. I had to leave my family. I had to go somewhere. And there's parts of it that was cool. It was fun. I was traveling a lot in first class and
Yeah.
visiting a lot of parts of the country that a lot of people have never seen in their life. And, part of my job was to stand on stage and talk, and people would laugh and then want to take pictures with me and get an autograph or whatever. Like, so parts of it were cool, but it's kind of like it's like a surgeon. A surgeon makes really good money, but they got to show up and do surgery. And so I remember having a conversation with a speaker mentor friend of mine, and he said, you want to regularly find things where the challenge exceeds the skill set. Meaning that when I first started speaking, I I felt like I was in over my head. The challenge exceeded the skill set. But what happens is over time it flips and the skill set exceeds the challenge. Meaning at that stage, like I could stand in front of an audience of 1,000 people and give an hour keynote and crush it, and internally just be on autopilot. And like it'd be really good, but I'm just kind
Right.
of bored.
Yeah.
And so he said, you regularly have to put yourself in situations and spots where you are outside of your comfort zone in a healthy way, but enough to just be like, dang, this is like, I got to lock in here. This is a big deal. And so I think about that a lot, of regularly putting myself in spots where the challenge exceeds the skill set. And when the skill set exceeds the challenge, again, looking for ways to flip that and reverse that. And again, getting outside of my comfort zone. So that conversation I had with this speaker friend was really impactful for thinking through and kind of making the transition from just purely being a speaker to now let's start a training company and coaching company for speakers.
Right. Which then in turn serves your family life balance, right? And
Yeah.
being able to stay home, and I'm assuming you're still doing speaking gigs and things like
I mean,
that.
some,
Yeah,
not
not
nearly,
as
like,
much.
again, like when I was doing this full time, I was, uh, doing 70 speaking gigs a year. So I was on the road all the time. Whereas now I'll do a few things here or there, but the Speaker Lab has grown tremendously. We've got 35, 40 people on our team now, and we've got a lot of
Congratulations.
moving pieces. And so, I stay plenty busy just as
Yeah.
CEO of a company. And so there's a lot of things there that I really enjoy. I'm really enjoying what I do. So today it's definitely much more of a business
Right.
than just being a speaker. And again, there's nothing wrong with being a speaker or being a surgeon or doing whatever high paying manual labor job. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But I knew, like, okay, I wanted to make some shifts toward creating more of a business and less of just having a job. And so this was definitely a step in that direction.
Because I know you said that younger Grant was just really fulfilled with those speaking moments. What
Mm-hmm.
in this part of your journey fills your cup? What part of the speaker lab?
Yeah, I've really enjoyed the challenge and the fun of building a business.
Okay.
And there are days where you're just like, dang, we're killing it. Like things are going really well, and days like the wheels of the bus are falling off, and I don't know why, and everything in between. I've really one thing that has been a goal of mine is we have a completely virtual company. Like I said, we got 35, 40 people on the team. I'm really intentional. I tell the team this regularly. Like, I want the Speaker Lab to be the best place that our team members ever work. And the reality is, like, we all got to work. We all got to make a living somehow. And so I know as a business owner that finding, attracting, retaining good talent is not easy. And so when someone comes to the Speaker Lab, I want to make it really, really difficult for them to leave, not in a manipulative way, but for
Right.
them to be like, I'm not, like the grass isn't greener over there.
Right.
Like I love what I do here. I had a someone on the team who told me recently. He said, "This is the first job I've had where I'm not thinking about my next job." And like,
That's a
how many people are
compliment.
like that, where they're doing something and like they're immediately thinking about where's the escape hatch, where's the exit, how do I get out of here? I don't know what I want to do, but it's not this. Like, you don't want people like that, and you want to create an environment like that. And so I want to make sure that the Speaker Lab is just an amazing place for people to work. And I know that we're making a tangible difference with our team members, but also in the work that we're doing with speakers and with our students. And so, yeah, every day there's new challenges and new things to try to figure out. So I love the puzzle of what
Yeah.
we're trying to solve right now.
Yeah. Do you think that you want to create this business and this feel because of the experience you had with that boss you said in Missouri? Do you think
That's a very great question, and something I've thought about, and I think that that's absolutely a factor, because that was not the case, for me at all. It was just like, this was a horrible work experience, and knowing, like, certainly not every experience is like that, and there are plenty of any place, and certainly churches that like have a great environment and great culture, and um, but that one in particular was just like, oh man, that as a boss, you're a jerk, and I don't want to be that to other people. Like, that's not a cool way to treat people. So yeah, absolutely, I do think that that's had an impact and factor in putting such a priority on how we treat people and the type of culture and environment that we have.
Yeah, and you know how you want to be treated. And so if you're the one kind of creating this space, that's up to you to kind of make it feel the way that you want to be treated as well.
Yep.
I think, you know, all of your story, you've said it and I'll repeat it, but basically there's all the pieces kind of are dictating what you're doing later. You know, you talk
Hmm.
about your parents getting divorced and now how you and your wife approach building your family and staying together and all these pieces. And now, you know, that particular terrible boss, which I think we've all had at one point in time, teaches us what we don't want for ourselves, what we don't want for other people. So
Yeah.
I'm inspired by that, just knowing that we should be looking at our lives as grateful for the experience.
Yeah.
I often have this conversation with other guests about, you know, my mom died when I was 8. So many people in my life say, if you could go back in time, would you change things? And now here in my 40s, I think, well, no, I wouldn't, because it sounds
Yep.
terrible to say it out loud, right? Like these words are terrible, but I wouldn't, because this is who I am because of that,
Yep.
right? Because of
Yep.
those moments. And so I completely agree with you in that no regrets or no changing things, because we wouldn't be where we are. We wouldn't be having this conversation. I wouldn't get to learn from you and have this experience. So
Yeah.
I think
Absolutely.
I think it's cool. I like to kind of wrap these conversations up with a question, and I'm trying to think of how I want to phrase this. Uh, I think because you're a business owner and because you are, you know, a professional speaker and you've done hundreds,
Yeah.
thousands,
Yeah.
lots
Yeah.
of them, what would you
Lots. Yeah.
what would you say is the most important thing for someone that kind of wants, is like, I really want to kind of do this? What's the first thing that they should do to kind of get into speaking, besides go to the speakerlab.com?
Yeah, definitely go to thespeakerlab.com. We got plenty of resources there. But yeah, I think that it's important to kind of get some clarity on what you how speaking fits into what you want to do.
Hmm.
Meaning that there are people that speak full time. That's all that they do. They do 60, 70 gigs a year or 100 gigs a year, and that's fine. There are people that maybe have a bunch of irons in the fire and like, I like speaking. I don't want to do it full time necessarily. I'd love to do 5 gigs or 10 gigs. And I just don't know, how do you find those and how much you charge and what do you speak about? And again, how does that world work? And so I think getting some clarity on like what, and again, you may not necessarily always know. I think that speaking and like in a kind of a larger place, um, starting a business or figuring out your career or just life in general. I heard a really good analogy one time that it's like driving a car at night. When you're driving a car at night, you can only see as far as the headlights will show you, but you can travel hundreds or thousands of miles that way
Hmm.
and have no idea of the roadblocks and the construction and the detours and the accident and all that's going to happen up ahead. You don't want to know any of that stuff, you know? And so, uh, like again, I love my life, but I don't have some 5 year or 10 year plan of I know exactly how it's going, because
Right.
I'm driving a car at night and I have a pretty good idea of like what this week and the next couple of weeks are going to
Right.
hold, and have some rough idea of what I hope the next few. But like you think about things like a pandemic, like nobody's sitting around going like, all right, 2020, buckle up because here it comes. Like nobody knows that, you
Right.
know. So you're driving a car at
I
night, and
love
then all
it.
of a sudden you get into something, you're like, holy crap, what is going on here? You know, like okay, we got to pivot, adapt, figure it out. Here we are. Let's roll with this. Um, and so, again, whether you want to be a speaker or whatever the business or career idea is, or just life in general, like there's a lot of unknowns and a lot of things I can't control. But I do know that I can control, my own thoughts, my own decisions, my own reaction, my own emotions, the people I surround myself with, the type of information that I ingest and digest and pay attention to, the people I want to be learning from and emulating. I can control those things. And so, yeah, I want to make sure that for whatever happens in life and the things like I can't control, recognize what I can control and pay attention to that.
Yeah, drive the car at night with intention, right?
Yep.
And I feel like that's the great takeaways from your story and the way that you've pivoted and created the life that you not necessarily knew you wanted, right? But at, whatever that headlight goes to, that's the life you want, and you're kind of driving
Yep.
towards that. I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day to be a part of the Life Shift podcast. It's it's been fun conversation.
Yeah, man, I've really enjoyed this. Thanks for the opportunity.
For sure. And if you're listening to this episode and you want to rate and review, Grant can probably agree those are sometimes just nice to see, and maybe
Yep.
don't do anything else, but they're nice to see. So we will be back next week with a brand new episode of the Life Shift podcast.